Hola, saludos a todos los espectadores, a los usuarios de lavanguardia.com. Hoy vamos a iniciar nuestro 16 ciclo de conferencias de sostenibilidad, esto que le hemos llamado SOS de socorro, vinculado al cambio climático, a la crisis climática que nos estamos sufriendo en el planeta. Durante estas conferencias hemos hablado con prestigiosas personalidades de toda índole. Y hoy vamos a tener la ocasión de hablar con Anita Soina, que es una joven activista de tan solo 24 años, pero luego hablaremos con ella y nos contará que en tan solo 24 años ya ha hecho un montón de cosas. Por ejemplo, escribir un libro que se llama The Green War o crear una fundación que es diu Spice Warriors. Incluso se ha presentado o se presentó hace 2 años, en el año 22, a las elecciones a la Asamblea Nacional en Kenia. Ella es una pastora, ella estaba viviendo en un poblado y era pastora y vio cómo el cambio climático estaba afectando su entorno, el río donde sus paisanos, ella misma, se bañaba, y eso le hizo cambiar completamente su orientación, su objetivo vital, para convertirse en activista para procurar que no haya desertización y para procurar que el planeta no sufra lo que está sufriendo. Por eso le queremos dar la bienvenida a este ciclo de conferencias en La Vanguardia y que nos pueda primero explicar, como siempre hacemos en estas charlas, pues un poco su speech, su introducción, y después mantendremos una conversación con ella. Por lo tanto, Anita Soina, gracias por estar con nosotros y cuando quieras.
An environmentalist and a climate change advocate from Kenya. I also identify as a green politician because I champion for environmental issues and social issues in the corridors of power. And in the last election, I ran for office for the position of Member of Parliament in a Green Party. And I currently hold a position of the Global Youth Champion at Sanitation and Water for All, which is a UN-hosted partnership that seeks to achieve sanitation, water, sanitation, and hygiene for all. I represent the youth voices in the WASH sector. I run an NGO that is Spice Warriors Climate and Environmental Organization, where we focus more on climate education in schools, in rural areas, and within leadership spaces. I also run a foundation, that is the Soina Foundation, that seeks to address social issues in the society. And I come from a pastoralist community, that's the Maasai community, that is well known for the amazing attire that I have, but is also known as the community that is most affected by climate change. And today I'm going to also share, we're going to watch this video of how climate change has affected different issues in the society, including education. So you can play the video.
I am Anita Soina, the founder of the Síguenos Foundation. I founded the Soina Foundation with the help of other youths.
This is Olekemunga, the way we have said. We have about 300 children here. Even if there are 300, they are not always in school. We have a record of 300, but on the ground every other time we realize we have around 40 to 50.
Haya, kuna watoto ambao hawasikii Kimasai, kwa hivyo ukiongea Kimasai mimi ninafanya translation. Ninawaelezea, sivyo? Haya.
On Monday we came here at Olekemunga Primary School. Tulikuwa tumekuja kutembea kupeana menstrual products, but coming here tukajua there is more that is here. The problem mainly ni maji, and tukapromise tutanunua maji, of which we did it. Asante sana the secretariat kwa kupea watoto maji, and we as the Soina Foundation tumesema tutakuwa tukirudi hapa tusimame na hii shule.
some of the challenges that we're going through is mostly the challenges that our children are going through. We as teachers, we are also facing shortage of water. We are also facing challenges in terms of the infrastructure we are teaching in during the day, especially when the extreme temperatures during the day. We find difficulties in the classrooms, teaching in classrooms.
Napenda masomo juu inaweza ikanipeleka mbali. Ninataka kuwa daktari. Kwa shule challenge yenye tunaface is lack of water and lack of food. Sometimes we get water and there's no food, and other time we have food and there's no water. That's the problem. Njia ni mbaya, hadi ukivaa socks za white, kuna vumbi, unachafua, na mawe, hadi zinaanza cause injury. When I grow up, I wish to be a nurse.
And this is my opinion. That's let us come together. Let us address this.
Yes, so that's one of the schools that we are working with, and it's a school that we fully adopted through the Soina Foundation. We have a program called Adopt a School, where we adopt a school and support them to address different issues. So when we first went to this school, it was before the UN Water Conference, and we went to support them with menstrual products and have menstrual hygiene conversations, sexual reproductive health education. But upon getting to the school, we realized that the challenges were so many. The children were playing outside during lunchtime, going back to class and not really having food to eat, not having anything to put in their mouth, not even water to quench their thirst. And this was during the hot season, where we were experiencing the worst droughts ever experienced in 40 years. And so that shows us how climate change not only affects direct issues like maybe water and all that, but also affects other social issues like education. And what really motivated us is how passionate the children were. They still came to school, they were still happy, they were still learning, even though when we looked at them, we were feeling sad. And we realized that as people who already understand what climate change is, and as we continue to push for voices to be heard, we realize that there is a gap in understanding the society's needs, because how we visited them with what we thought they would need. But upon reaching there, we realized that that's not exactly what they need. So this applies still in the global spaces when addressing climate change. You realize that the communities that are most affected are left behind and not brought on the table for them to be able to talk about it. But the beauty about all this is that we have the power as citizens, as young people, as every individual to make a difference. When we adopted this school, we really didn't know what we were going to do with the school, and we were just supporting it from our own volunteers, supporting and getting water. But in the process, there came donors and funders who supported us to implement this, and they came in to build new classrooms for for the school. And when you watch the video, you realize that the teachers talked about the harsh conditions teaching in such classrooms in hot weathers. And so there was an upgrade of a school, and with 8 classrooms, with a kitchen, a functioning kitchen, 50,000 water tank liters, 50,000 liters water tank, and a farm pond that helps them to farm and to be able to produce food in school. So to us, this really spoke to us that you're never too young to make a difference, and sometimes you're just scared of how will we do it, how are we going to make it. But as long as you just start, then you will be fine. The Soina Foundation tomorrow will also be joining partners and the donors who founded this to be launching this school and hand it over to the community. But that we don't stop there. We did realize that even the teachers will need to be supported. The community living around will need to be empowered through different activities that we carry out in the foundation, like smart farming, training them on how to produce food, and how to build resilience. And for us, it's about empowering the entire community. So we started from a school, which is an institution and easy to access, and now we are moving to empowering the entire community of teachers, parents, and the people in the neighborhood of the school. We also carry out mentorship activities where we move around in different schools, trying to support teachers to talk to school children, because then you do realize that some people, especially girls from my community, want to advance and want to grow in their careers, but then they do not have people to look up to. So we look for leaders, like the one in picture. We look for leaders from that community, tag them along to the school, so that children in school can be able to understand how possible it is for also them to grow and become the change that they want to see in the society. We also do this to help support schools that cannot afford to bring in motivational speakers and inspirational speakers, like some of us were lucky to have when we were young. So we bridge this gap by working with teachers to ensure that the girls, for example, in communities are trained on early childhood marriages, how we train them how to stay safe from female genital mutilation, where to report in case there's a case of sexual assault, and so many other things. We also do realize that in the community that I come from, the poverty levels, which have been worsened by climate change still, since it's a community of pastoralists who keep livestock for livelihoods, and with droughts, having their livestock swept away, forcing them to marry off young girls at a very young age in exchange of livestock. So we try and have these conversations with them to understand how we also can step in and bring in the authority to also protect them. And as we do that, we are also trying to educate parents on how they can adapt to climate change without having to turn the young girls to bridesmaids just because they need to get livestock back. We also work a lot with educating young people, young livestock farmers, especially the youths of our age, because of cultural issues. You realize that in our community, it's because of culture that they're livestock keepers. And no matter how much you may try to emphasize on why we need to shift because of climate change and start practicing smart farming and climate smart agriculture, it's not really that easy, because then this means we are breaking the cultural ties. So we speak to the young people because we understand that this is the generation coming up, and so we will need them to also be the stewards of the same. My journey as an environmentalist started in the year 2018, at the age of 18, just after I had completed my high school education. And at this point, I just wanted to give back to the society, and so I joined politics immediately. And at that time, I was not eligible to vote. And while I was in the political space, I was approached by a friend who was wondering why was I in that space as young as 17 years old? Why was I actively engaged in politics? And I shared to him that I having been a scout back in high school and having participated in community work, I really want to do something that can give back to the society or can bring about change in one way or another. And that is when he introduced to me the Sustainable Development Goals, something I had not heard of my entire time until I joined university at that time. So I went through the Sustainable Development Goals and realized that it was going to be easy for me to work on SDG 13, that is climate action. And when I started with a group of friends where we'd just go out and plant trees, and that was it. But because of my thirst for knowledge on the same, I kept reading, keeping in mind that I was pursuing a different career in university. And so I kept reading, attending workshops and conferences related to environment and climate. And that's when I came to understand the nexus between climate and other issues. One of the campaigns that we carry out at Spice Warriors Climate and Environmental Organization is the A Tree, a Child campaign. A Tree, a Child campaign is a campaign that we started so that we help nurture young children in climate action so that they are able to get knowledge at least earlier than some of us did. And so with the A Tree, a Child campaign, we are present both in Kenya and Tanzania. And what we do with this campaign is we make sure that in every constituency that we go to, we ask a member of parliament to adopt the same campaign. So when we move to areas, we encourage members of parliament, women representatives in parliament, and different leaders to be able to be the patrons of this campaign. And the reason we do so is because we are trying to bring together the leadership, the community, and the children. And when we plant the trees with the children and delegate so that they take care of the trees, we also make sure that we are planting indigenous trees and fruit trees for nutrition purposes and also to help curb hunger in institutions. So far, the project has been able to take place in more than 50 schools, both in Kenya and Tanzania. And so far, as an organization, we've been able to plant 12,000 trees that we have with a survival rate of over 80%. The reason we do this is because you also realize that when we talk about tree growing and environment conservation, as the late Professor Wangari Maathai said, you have to not just plant the tree, but you have to water the tree and take care of it to maturity. But of course, in the process, we also face challenges because then you realize that as you continue to do the planting and as you wait for the trees to grow, there is massive deforestation happening in different parts of the country, with the communities not having enough knowledge and with laws not strict enough to prevent them from doing the same. So it becomes so discouraging to realize that we could be making 5 steps forward and moving 30 steps backwards. So that is one of the challenges that we face because then it discourages most young people. But also something when I was starting this work, I realized that the language of conservation is really tough. But then to be able to appeal to children and youths, we have to simplify the language of conservation. So we moved our work from just working using the English conversation of climate change to translating some of our work to simple languages and to even local languages so that they can understand. 2 years back, we started Spice Warriors Kids, which is a kids corner under the organization. And so far, we have grown to have over 20 children across the country. And what we do with children is through parents, we identify children who develop interest in nature, then we support them and we allow them to learn what they can learn at their age, and we support them to create content related to environment conservation and showcase their work digitally so that it inspires other parents and inspires other children who are on the digital space to be able to do the same. Now, one big problem that we've had in the country, I can say for the past few years, is political goodwill. And with political goodwill, you realize that it's easy for us to move as one. Private sector, public sector, civil society organizations, and I mean the society in general. In 2021, I had my first trip to my first COP, that was COP26 in Glasgow. And at that time, I was already part of campaign processes since I am also passionate about politics. But when I got there, I saw young people, so many young people, led by Greta and Vanessa Nakate, having a climate strike. And at this time, we had over thousands and thousands of people. And I got scared because I had never been to such a global stage where people come together, not only young, but even old people coming together to work in the streets and demand for what they called action from leaders. And when I read so many placards and listened to the conversations, everybody was addressing the grievances to world leaders. And so I told myself, since it's the political year in Kenya, maybe apart from trying to influence change from outside, why not try to influence change from within? And so I came back and presented myself as a candidate for Member of Parliament position. I was just 21 with a murky political space that we still have in our continent and our country, with the challenges that young people do face and young women face in politics. I still was determined to stay in the race even when it didn't look easy, because I realized we have to normalize the conversation. And for us to normalize the conversation has to start. And so I was not afraid to be part of those people who will be known for starting these and pushing for green politics and green ideologies in Kenya. And I was not able to win, but this has taught me a lot, because over the months after the elections, I have seen young people from different countries. I have seen friends from Malaysia and other countries run for office and say that I inspired them to do the same, so that they can champion for climate issues and societal issues from within the corridors of power. But that also gave me an opportunity, and that currently I'm working with the chairperson of the Climate Change Committee in Kenya's Senate, who is so passionate about politics and climate change. So I look at that as a journey that we started, may not have, we did not win at that time, but we postponed our win. But the key focus here was to educate young people that we also can get to the spaces. If we feel that something is wrong from point B, we can also get to that point and try to correct the challenges from there. Yeah.
Muy bien. Bueno, primero de todo, nuestra admiración, porque, claro, usted tienes 24 años y nos ha relatado una historia de tu activismo desde que sales de la escuela y montas Spice Warriors, montas una fundación, escribes un libro de Green War y impulsas todas estas iniciativas vinculadas a la educación, te presentas a las elecciones, te vas a Glasgow y creo que allí te nombran campeona mundial de la juventud. En fin, has hecho un montón de cosas en tan solo 24 años. ¿Esto es propio de Kenia o eres una persona muy especial que enseguida te has concienciado de esto? Es decir, los jóvenes en Kenia son como tú, tan valientes y tan, en fin, implicados.
Yeah, I can say it's not really the same, and not only in Kenya. You do realize that we're living in a generation where some other things do matter as compared to really trying to address societal challenges. Again, over time, we have seen this change. When I joined the space, only few people were speaking about it. But over time, because of the challenges that we continue to face in the society, the challenges are producing more champions for these issues. And that is not to say it's a good thing that we have to have a challenge so that people can see the need to champion for this. But it's just the fact that over time, young people are empowered, young people are given spaces, given opportunities, is when they have started to realize that my voice also do matter. One thing that we also do is we try to let young people understand every day that we don't want one youth to do a million things. We want millions and millions of youths to do the little thing that they can do from where they are, and that's how we change the world. So I think that also plays a big role and a huge role in bringing people together. But for sure, to appreciate is that we have so many youths who are also trying to push for change in different spheres in the community.
En Europa decimos que Europa envejece porque Europa, bueno, la pirámide de edad es muy alta, la gente tiene, o sea, hay poca natalidad y hay poco relevo generacional. En Kenia deduzco que no es tan así, tenéis muchos jóvenes y eso puede impulsar más rápido el cambio de políticas y el cambio de mentalidad que tú estás impulsando en la fundación y en tus actividades.
Oh, yes. In Kenya and in Africa, in fact, in Africa, over 65% of the population is made up of young people. And I think that's really impressive because then it helps. I mean, it's not easy, especially to change from the leadership space because it's gatekept and young people are known mostly to be selected and not elected. So the conditions are made unfavorable so that we don't get elected, and then later on you have to be selected. But I can say that having young people as bigger part of the population really plays a huge role, because if you look at most of the innovations, the green innovations that we have in the continent, in the African continent and in Kenya, you do realize that most of these are pioneered by young people. And if we talk about green jobs, and I mean people who are offering the same skills, you do realize that it's young people because of our population. And also because of our population, have been able to have a voice as young people and to be able to demand for spaces within certain tables that we feel are important for what we do.
Vamos a hablar un poco de ti, pero vinculado al clima. He leído en algunas entrevistas que te han hecho, claro, tú procedes de un pueblo de pastoreo, ya lo has explicado, el pueblo Masái, y tú dices que de pequeña te bañabas en el río Mara y que ahora ese río apenas se está secando. Si tú tienes 24 años, esto quiere decir que la crisis climática, la emergencia climática va a una enorme velocidad. Si tú te bañabas hace 20 años en ese río y ahora ese río se está secando, quiere decir que vamos a un desastre muy rápidamente, ¿no?
Yeah, for sure. And that's one thing that really pushed me to champion for these issues, because initially when we used to hear about climate change, we used to think it's something that happened far away in the West and not even anywhere close to us. But when we started to understand that the drying up of rivers, the droughts, the floods, is exactly what we mean when we talk about climate change, then I realized there was a problem. Looking at when I was 6, that means about 18 years ago, I was able to go to the river. I used to take care of the cattle. For my grandfather, we'd go to the river, make sure that the livestock have water. We'd swim. And every time we had rainy seasons, we were not even allowed to go to the river because then crocodiles would come and other animals. But right now, you literally step on stones to cross. There is no longer need for bridge. And it's something that we've seen, especially in rivers in Kenya. It's not the only river that has dried up. Most water catchments, water levels are going down in huge dams and all that. And that is when I literally actually knew these are a problem, because we are not talking about the 80s. We are talking about just the other year. And that shows that we are really in a phase where climate change is accelerating, and that means we as human beings are accelerating the problem. I read, when I was reading and learning about climate change, I did realize that climate change and the climate has been changing, and it changes over a longer period of time. And from what we were taught, it was from 30 years maybe that we would see the changes, and that the changes were insignificant. But because of human actions, then it has accelerated it and pushed it to a negative, so the climate is changing negatively. And so for it to change within a span of 10, 15 years drastically, then it means we are not anywhere better.
Claro, el agua es un elemento fundamental para la vida. Desde los activistas y las personalidades que han pasado por este ciclo de conferencias nos han planteado soluciones a medio y largo plazo, más allá de la concienciación y de la educación, ¿no? Pero, ¿qué soluciones más a corto plazo estáis planteando en Kenia para paliar la sequía? Que, por cierto, también en nuestro país, en España, la estamos sufriendo. ¿Algún tipo de tecnología, desalación, desaladoras de agua de mar? ¿Qué tipo de soluciones se están planteando más allá de que obviamente tenemos que revertir la situación más a nivel planetario, a nivel global?
Well, so first of all, I did realize that the first step is making the community aware. Because sometimes we do go, like I said before, we go to communities and impose what we think is what should happen. But then what our focus more is on is indigenous knowledge. Because you do realize that the community, in one way or another, without understanding that it's climate change and without understanding what they have been going through, they have tried their best to cope up with these challenges through their own mechanisms using indigenous knowledge. So what we do is we reach out to communities, we have sessions with them, get to understand what they have been doing, and then try to see if the same can be used in other areas for adaptation. So we move to communities, for example, pastoral elite communities, listen to their stories and know how they deal with these issues and transfer the same to other people. When it comes to the technologies used, for example, like in the water space, like you said, what I personally do is I am so keen in working with existing solutions, so that we work with the young people who already have solutions, or we work with the organizations and companies that already have solutions that can fit our community. And what we do is we act as a medium to be able to transfer the same technology to our communities. So that's basically what we deal with. So mostly we focus on community engagement, because then you realize most of the times we'll end up with amazing ideas, but then we do not involve those people that we make these innovations for.
Y luego todo eso va ligado a la propia actividad económica. Hablas que en tu país o en tu comunidad vivís de la agricultura, también de la ganadería, que toda ella necesita agua para subsistir. Ahí también se necesita un cambio de mentalidad, pero también tecnológico, para poder adaptarse a esa carencia de agua que tenéis. Ahí solos no podéis. Entiendo que los gobiernos o el gobierno o alguien tiene que ayudar justamente a hacer esa transición para optimizar el gasto de agua y hacerlo mucho más sostenible, ¿no? ¿Estáis en eso también?
Yeah, we are currently working on the same, and together with the Ministry of Water in Kenya, which is also member of the Sanitation and Water for All, where I'm the Global Youth Champion. There has been so much concern to support communities when it comes to the same, looking at different mechanisms like water harvesting, for example, because you realize that we really talk about droughts, and one thing that always happens is once we have rainy seasons, it's always automatic that what comes next is drought. So the big problem has always been, how do we manage to even take advantage and harvest water during rainy seasons? So the Ministry of Water in Kenya is trying to do the same, and that's what we are also trying to do with our communities. If you've had a chance to see the structures of the Maasai community, the houses that they live in, the beautiful manyatas, you do realize that as compared to other iron sheet roofs, then they are not able to harvest water. So it rains and all the water goes to waste because of culture, because of how they set up their houses. And if they have to harvest, maybe they have to use schools to do that. And so we are coming in also to try and let the community members understand why, as we are not ditching culture, but we are trying to introduce structures that are favorable for water harvesting in our communities. And we are also trying to to support, because you realize that water tables are so close. So after construction of boreholes by different either government or well-wishers, we try and work with companies that help to purify the water. Because when we talk about water, it's not just any water. But I mean, while other people elsewhere in the world are striving to get clean and safe water, you realize that this same community is striving to get any kind of water. So we are also trying to step in to make sure that we are talking about clean and safe water for use. Yeah.
¿Y hay ayudas gubernamentales para hacer esa transición tanto a nivel particular de estas casas, ¿no?, que ayuden a recoger el agua, como también a nivel colectivo de la economía, de la agricultura, de la ganadería? ¿Existen ayudas económicas para hacer esa transición?
So far, I can say that is where the big problem is, because then we haven't had that really addressed so much by the government. But then you realize also the biggest challenge is poverty. Transitioning from those kind of structures to the other structures that support water harvesting is a bit costly for some of these communities. But then also especially the local government, where because we do expect that local government is able to push for these, considering different regions have different issues. And in Kenya, after having the devolved government, where we have the counties and every county governor, you realize that that is where and that's why I talk about political goodwill, because no matter how much the president would have the goodwill and the governors down there do not have the goodwill, it becomes a problem. So I can say that is still one big challenge that we have. The governors of these arid and semi-arid regions are putting effort, but not as much effort as we'd want to see to support the same.
Y luego en la comunidad has hablado de que habéis hecho un esfuerzo en aproximaros en el lenguaje, ¿no?, en hacerlo más fácil, en que la gente lo entienda bien. Generacionalmente, respecto a tus padres, tus abuelos, respecto a tu comunidad, ¿se entiende bien lo que tú estás prodigando, lo que tú estás promoviendo? ¿O te ven como una figura un poco así iluminada y ideológica, pero que tiene poco seguimiento? ¿Cómo estás detectando eso intergeneracionalmente?
Well, so what we normally do is we encourage intergenerational dialogue, one, because you realize that there's a huge disconnect. There's a huge disconnect between us, between our generation and the generations that have passed. And also you realize that most people who do carry, for example, as a young person who's carrying out climate education and speaking to community, and also coming from a community where culturally it's not easy for them to listen to a young person, and especially a young woman. It's really a problem. And so passing information is not... sometimes you could pass information and you'd not be taken seriously. So what we have adopted in our foundation, for example, is we work with community outreach personnel, and the community outreach personnel are elders. And even in our board, we make sure that we have elders who we take through training for them to understand what we do and why we do what we do. And once they are also part of the vision, then it becomes easy, because then they help us to communicate to the communities. And also the intergenerational dialogue conversation that I mentioned earlier is because you realize that most young people left the setup. Like for myself, for some years, I was lucky to be out of that setup. I went to school elsewhere. So you realize that because of that, young people do come back home and they are not on the same page with the other generation. So we usually encourage them to be able to sit, listen to them, and because through the power of storytelling, especially from the older generation, we are able to learn so much. For example, we carry out a practice in some of the arid and semi-arid regions with some of our partners, which is called farmer-managed natural regeneration, which is just a natural way of growing existing trees without having to buy seedlings. We visited communities and realized that's what they've been practicing. And if you look at it keenly, it's the cheapest way to actually to restore degraded land, and it's also the easiest way that communities can do without having to need water or funds. And so that really taught us that sometimes when we talk about climate education, even to the communities, it's not about us teaching the community every other time. It's also about us learning from the community.
El énfasis que ponías cuando hablabas de esta escuela que estáis impulsando, el hecho de que las niñas, las mujeres, quieren también progresar. Hace unas conferencias en este mismo ciclo, una de las personalidades que entrevistamos nos hablaba de la importancia de que la mujer tomara las riendas también dentro de las familias, dentro de las comunidades, de esta conciencia ecológica para dar ese salto. ¿Tú crees que con la educación, con ese trabajo que estáis haciendo, también a través de la mujer, o sea, la feminización de la sociedad puede ayudar a dar más velocidad a esa conciencia que tú estás defendiendo?
Oh, yes, for sure. Women are just great stewards of the environment. And throughout the years that I've worked with communities, it has been so easy to work with women. One, they're not rigid with information. And two is that you realize that climate change affects food production. It affects most of the roles that women have been left for in the society. In a family setup, when we have droughts and there has to be migration for some moments, you realize that fathers will leave maybe with their sons and go and take care of their livestock. The mothers are left at home with the same challenges. At least for those living on the way, they will find something to eat and to drink. But then mothers are left behind. Girls are going to fetch water far away, missing school and all those things. So for women, it has been easy because to them, they feel like you're trying to provide solutions to their problems back home. And over time, we work with a community of women where one woman from the community was trained on smart farming, vertical farming, kitchen gardens and all that, and how to be able to produce vegetables using little water. And she has been training other women in the community. She has trained 87 people who then tend to train others in different villages. And that is so impressive because then they carry out these activities on their own. They look at, when you drop a project to them, they really do take care of these projects. And we also try to empower women economically and for them to understand how they can also be able to produce food for themselves and to be able to money for themselves. You realize that in our community, which is a pastoralist community, anything related to livestock belongs to the man in the house. So if you're talking about animal proceeds, if you're talking about selling cows, the money belongs to the man. But so we encourage women to participate in other things. For example, the bead that I have, this is beadwork from the community. Then they are able to try and participate in other ways, sources of livelihoods for themselves, and to feed the same family. So working with women is really one of the easiest things to do. They are receptive, they accept knowledge, they are willing to share. It's for sure, it's the easiest. Yeah.
Y la relación que hay entre la desforestación, la desertización, la falta de agua con la despoblación, también lo estáis viviendo, es decir, gente que se queda sin el recurso del agua, por lo tanto sin recurso para cultivar, sin recurso también para pastorear, para tener el ganado y que decide marcharse, irse a la ciudad o irse incluso a otro país o a Europa buscando una vida mejor. ¿Eso también lo estáis notando, esa despoblación provocada por la desertización?
Yes. Starting with the community still, the Maasai community and the Maa communities in general, the moving the moving in search of water and pasture, as much as it's now called culture, is not really because it's culture, but it's because people are moving in search of water and pasture for their livestock. So this is because where they stay, they do not have access to these things. I call it migration happens. The population in the cities are now growing because people are leaving those areas to come to the cities where at least you could find something, even if it means to buy, but you could find something to eat, you could find water and all that. And we've also seen people, for example, in Kenya, a huge percentage of our land is arable, but because of lack of water, we are not able to produce food for ourselves. We are not able to feed, even the nation is not able to feed itself. So depending on imports and all that. And so this has forced so many people to leave, and some never return. We have visited communities where we'd be shown houses and we'd be told that the owner left, but they never came back. Because if you look at, for example, the drought that we had last time, and with the fact that the land, they cannot be able to till the land because of water shortage, they can't produce food for themselves, they had to move. And while they moved, they expected that short rains were going to be here because we were used to short rains and long rains. So we started with losing long rains, and then we also lost short rains. So people went, and some just never came back. On the way, they found other things to do, or maybe they found families to stay with. But then you realize also, as this migration happens, usually there's conflict. As people migrate, and when you look at pastoralists are migrating with their livestock, they have to drive their livestock to people's lands forcefully because it's so hard for someone to see green grass and ignore it, even if the land does not belong to them. So this has also brought about a lot of conflict, and many families, and especially women and children, are left behind by the breadwinners, who then move away to seek better livelihood and leave the family behind, only not to return. So it's really happening, and we have witnessed that. I have witnessed that.
Cuando fuiste a la COP26 en Glasgow, también pasa en otras que ha habido, ¿no? ¿Tú crees o has visto el choque que hay entre cómo se vive el cambio climático en África, en cómo se vive en lo que llamamos el mundo más desarrollado, en Europa o en Estados Unidos, y que os miran un poco raro como diciendo estos que vienen de Kenia, ¿no? En tu caso, ¿no? Que están contando que no tienen agua o que no pueden llevar el ganado a pastorear, y en cambio el primer mundo, para decirlo de alguna manera, está preocupado por otras cosas. Y ahí hay un choque, como un choque de percepción de la urgencia o no de ese cambio climático. ¿Eso lo has notado?
Yes, I have noticed, but I also think that climate change in Africa has been normalized by other people from elsewhere in the world, and looking at it from, I always feel like it's looked at it from a point of, it's okay for it to happen here because I mean, we've been experiencing these effects, and every other time we see this in news. For example, the COP27, before COP27, the images that were being shared of dead giraffes and dead children were taken from the northern part of Kenya to influence the outcome of COP. But then when you look at the other part of the world, you realize that it happens and it's breaking news. Oh my God, it's flooding, I don't know, in Germany, or it's happening where it's talked about like it's really, really a big issue, like it shouldn't have happened, you know, like you shouldn't be experiencing floods, but it has happened. But for us, even how the reporting happens, it's talked about as if it's something that should be happening in Africa, something that should be happening in that continent and the global south. Like it's normal that we had droughts and today we have floods. It's made to look like it's so normal, while elsewhere it's talked about it as if it's really an emergency. Well, while I was growing up, I didn't get a chance to witness a lot of these changes in the Western or the developed countries until recently, when I started realizing that, oh, so for sure they also experience floods. And so it's good that they also experience, maybe that pushes them to action. Another thing I find as a problem is when it comes to addressing our climate change issues from the big meetings, the big corporations, the big NGOs want to teach Africa how it should do its work so that it's able to adapt or maybe to mitigate climate change without saying, Africa, what are your local solutions? It's the same as activism. Look at activism in the West and activism in Africa. In Africa, if you identify as a climate activist or as an activist, you will be looked at as somebody who is striking and just holding placards and demonstrating, and that's it. That's why most of the times you realize that climate activists from Africa love to identify as a climate advocate so that they can be able to be allowed into certain rooms. In the Western country, activism, I mean, it even works that activists are listened to. They could go to the street. It's not wrong to hold placards. It's not wrong to ask leaders for what you feel you need it and like demand it, like we want this and this. But then back home, you have to become and just have to, have a different kind of way of doing things. And so that's why you realize most young people in the African continent, beyond holding placards, also have projects on ground that they can show that apart from activism, this is also what we are doing back at home. So I think it's just not the same. But I agree that Eurocentric solutions, for example, are not Afrocentric solutions. Sometimes we just need Afrocentric approach to our problems, and that means coming together and understanding what works for us, because what works for developed countries will not work for us. And most of the times that's where there is a problem in those meetings. You put us in one meeting and want us to discuss as if we have the same problems. And I mean, by that it's a fault on both our leaders and also the leaders of the developed countries. And just to add on, it brings about my views when it comes to green transition and moving 100% transition to clean energy. It gets me back to thinking the African continent contributes less than 4% of the global emission. So, and African countries, for example, my country, the energy grid in Kenya is 94% clean energy, 94% solar, wind, and all that, hydro. So you realize we are doing well, but there's so much attention on the little coal that countries like Kenya do have and countries in Africa do have, as compared to there's so much attention on what we are doing right. So pointing and saying that Kenya has a coal plant, Uganda is doing this, but in the real sense, countries developed using fossil fuels, and then after they developed, they came and said, now we all need to transition. So it is not just. So for me, I look at it as first to face in, first to face out. Last to face in, last to face out. Yeah.
Bueno, vamos acabando, pero hay una pregunta personal que te quiero hacer, porque te presentaste a las elecciones, no ganaste, pero claro, solo tienes 24 años, por lo tanto, no sé si tienes ganas de volverte a presentar y de un día ser diputada o ser representante en el Parlamento de Kenia.
Yes, I'm willing to run for office, and if there's one dream that I have is that whatever I started, I have to fulfill, and I am hopeful that one day I'll become a member of parliament. If not in Kenya, then elsewhere, still fine. But in the next elections, I also intend to run, but may not necessarily be the same position. It depends on so many factors. Politics in Africa is the most challenging thing to experience. It's traumatizing, to say the least. And so depending on how the political situation will be, and also depending on how the issues that we seek to address will look like at that time, then that will determine. But for sure, I'm determined to stay in politics until I become a member of parliament, either through National Assembly or through the Senate. That's my dream.
Y quién sabe si un día presidenta de Kenia.
Thank you. Amen to that.
Pues muchas gracias, Anita Soina, por haber compartido esta charla hoy con todos nosotros, y mucha suerte en la política, pero sobre todo en el objetivo principal, que es esta educación y esta concienciación que estáis llevando a cabo para paliar el cambio climático y para hacer que la sociedad sobreviva en un mundo más sostenible, siendo conscientes de la crisis en la que estamos inmersos, no solo en África, sino en todo el planeta. Muchas gracias y suerte.
Thank you very much for having me.